Good morning, everyone. I think you know I'm Megan Moyer, right? Okay. About 15 years ago, I had the good fortune to attend a free workshop here in Santa Barbara that was put on by Byron Katie. Katie is an American speaker and author who teaches a method of self-inquiry known as the work. I'm doing that because that's how it's in quotes, the work. I'd never heard of her, but my friend had, and since we were both in the early stages of our own forms of self-inquiry, we decided to go. And what I witnessed was nothing short of transformational for me. The general theme of the workshop suggested that the work is simply challenging our thoughts. And as we watched, a brave couple volunteered to go up on stage and discuss a problem they were having with a family member. She asked the couple to explain their problem, and I'm going to call the couple Bob and Sue. And Sue said, "My brother Chris has some mental and physical disabilities, and I'm very worried about the way he's living. He just seems so isolated and unhappy. He has a subsidized apartment, but he spends most of his time in the apartment watching TV and not doing much with anyone else. And he has a therapeutic group that he goes to, but I think he needs more. And also, when he goes shopping, he buys a lot of packaged goods and processed foods, and I would like to see him eat a healthier diet. Now, I've offered to help him and take care of some of these things, but he's resistant. And after I call several times, he just won't answer the phone." Katie listened, and when Sue had finished describing her brother's problems, she told the couple, "Thank you for being so willing to share this with us and for being willing to be challenged. So now I'm going to ask you a few questions," she said, "and I'm going to ask about the problems you're having with your brother, and I just want you to answer yes or no." And Katie said, "My first question is your brother isolated and unhappy?" And Bob and Sue both answered immediately, "Yes." And Katie said, "Can you absolutely know that it's true?" And Sue said, "Yes, I absolutely know that it's true." And Katie asked, "How exactly do you know this to be true? Has he told you this, or have you asked him?" And Sue said, kind of uncomfortably, "Well, no, he hasn't said anything, and I haven't asked him. It's just that he seems so isolated and unhappy." And Katie asked, "Well, based on your answer that he seems isolated and unhappy, may I push you a bit further? And may I ask you to think a bit more deeply about whether or not you truly know this to be true? Yes or no?" So Sue and Bob both paused and they looked at each other for support, I suppose, before they both said, "No, we really don't know this to be true." And then they just let out these big sighs, like, "Oh my gosh, all right, that was a relief. I guess I don't know." Katie said, "Okay, we're making progress here. Now let me ask you this. How do you react and feel in your bodies when you believe these thoughts?" And Sue said, "Well, I feel powerless and anxious, and my stomach gets tight and upset, and I get irritable with my husband." And Bob smiled and said, "I don't know how I feel. I guess I just feel sad that we're not able to help Sue's brother, and I get worried when Sue feels frustrated, and I don't like it when she gets upset with me." So Katie said, "Good, good, good, good. Now let me ask, how would you both feel without these thoughts? Who or what would you be?" That's a big question. Bob was quiet, and Sue struggled before she said, "Well, I guess I'd feel better. I wouldn't be so anxious and worried all the time, I suppose. I guess I'd be able to find time to take care of some of my own projects that I've been putting off, and that would be nice. Bob just nodded. He didn't have any words. But Katie went on to speak not only to Bob and Sue, but to the audience at that point by explaining that this is a perfect example of how we humans get caught up in other people's business and assume that we know what's best. And she said, you just witnessed Bob and Sue being courageous and beginning to let go of their beliefs that Sue's brother is unhappy, unhealthy, and isolated. They didn't ask him if he felt unhealthy or unhappy or if he feels isolated. And they didn't ask him if he was unhappy with his apartment or with his therapeutic group or if he felt like he needed more. No, for all they knew, Sue's brother is completely happy with his situation. And the reason he won't pick up the phone is because he thinks Sue pesters him too much. So Katie went on to say that the suffering that Bob and Sue had been experiencing was of their own creation because they were unhappy with reality. They felt uncomfortable without considering Chris's reality and the probability that he was completely happy living the way he did. Now, I'm not real sure what Bob and Sue's takeaway was and whether they actually learned if Chris was happy or unhappy, but I saw myself in them at that event. Not the same problems for sure, but I walked away from that event saying to myself, oh my gosh, I think this way all the time. I think I know what's right and what's best for other people. And I'm always making assumptions. And those assumptions always end up with me being in the wrong or somehow responsible for everything, or I erroneously malign someone else. Have you ever done that where you assume somebody else is at fault only to embarrassingly find out that they weren't? Well, I sure have. And then the ultimate feeling I have is that I always feel bad, really, really bad. So after the workshop, voila, an opportunity arose in my life that gave me a chance to challenge my thinking. My husband and I were in a conversation about our home garden, and he wanted us to create planter beds. He'd do one, and I'd do another one, and I really don't know why he wanted to do that, but that's what he said, and, well, I kind of just ignored it. And I just didn't do anything about it. I thought, oh, gosh, and I left it alone. Until one day, he proudly came by and he said, I'd like to show you something in the garden. And we walked out there with our gardener, and he showed me this beautiful garden bed. This is my garden bed that our gardener had planted for him. Now, my reaction was feeling accused, defensive, upset. In that moment, I thought, he's angry for me because I didn't do this. Obviously, he got our gardener to do it, so he must have expected me to do it, and I didn't do it. So I made these huge assumptions that made me just feel horrible in that moment. So I took a deep breath, and I remembered Byron Katie, and I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this, and I'm gonna ask out loud the question, are you upset with me for not putting together a garden bed? And he paused and he looked at me like I was nuts. And he said, no, of course not. And then I proceeded to engage in this silent conversation with myself. What? He's not upset with me? Then I asked myself, well, how would I feel if I allowed myself to believe him? I guess I'd feel good. I wouldn't be upset. I'd be calm and maybe even a little amused. But I didn't stop there. I continued the self-dialogue, and I said, no, he's lying. He is not telling me the truth. I don't believe him. I just didn't want to let myself off the hook, did I? At least not at that time in my life. I didn't want to let myself off the hook. Clearly I had more work to do, but just asking the question was a big start for me. Never before would I ask those questions. I always assumed, and I always walked away feeling bad. After that experience, I immediately went out and purchased a couple of Byron Katie's books and dove into doing some more work, along with the other work that I was doing simultaneously. And I learned that I could apply this method to virtually every problem or issue in my life. Anything that caused me pain or distress, whether it was emotional, physical, spiritual, financial, or even to the injustices that I saw in the world around me. It was huge. It was a revelatory experience for me to be able to ask myself, how do I know this to be true? And then to go through the process of realizing that I really didn't know everything. So how about you? Everyone here and on Zoom, do you have any problems that irritate you or depress you? Do you think your problem is unsolvable? Or do you find yourself engaging with a lot of shoulds or shouldn'ts in your thinking? This shouldn't be this way, or you shouldn't feel that way, or he should understand what I'm thinking. He should know. Shoulds are an indicator that we are struggling with reality. So what is reality anyway? Reality is what is true, and the truth is whatever is in front of you, whatever is really happening, whether you like it or not. You don't have to like reality. Here's what Byron Katie says about reality. In reality, there is no such thing as a should or a shouldn't. These are only thoughts that we superimpose onto reality. Without the should and the shouldn't, we can see reality as it is. And this leaves us to act efficiently, clearly, freely, and sanely. Asking, what's really happening here can help bring the mind out of the story that we tell ourselves and back into the real world. Now here's another personal example of mine that I get to share about this. A few years ago, I lost a job that I loved. And I was devastated, and I railed against that. And I engaged in shoulds and shouldn'ts up one side and down the next. This just shouldn't have happened to me. But the reality was that it did happen to me. I was knocked flat for a while until I was able to change my narrative to, I lost my job, so now what intelligent solutions can I find? Now, which mindset do you think is more empowering? The second, obviously. My first reaction included shouldn'ts, which left me fighting against reality. It left me depressed. It left me feeling powerless. It left me feeling as if I wasn't good enough. And yes, I pouted a little bit. Actually, I pouted a whole lot. And for a long time, I actually pouted for quite a while before I was able to get myself back on track. And once I got out of the muck that was of my own making, I was able to move in a direction that opened many more doors for me and created better job opportunities where I felt more fulfilled and experienced far less emotional distress. Now, isn't it funny that most of us prefer being stuck in these types of struggles. And so why is this? It's because we're so attached to our thoughts. We believe that they're true and don't bother to investigate what's underlying those thoughts. And this is where I found myself after my experience in the garden. I'd scratched the surface, but in order to really make the changes to my thinking or to my degree of suffering, I had to dig deeper to determine what old stuff was lurking around in there, tainting my ability to live happily and free from suffering. Here's what Pema Chodron says about suffering. It isn't the things that are happening to us that cause us to suffer. It's what we say to ourselves about the things that are happening. The truth you believe and cling to makes you unavailable to hear anything new. So now I'd like to ask you a question. I'd like to ask us all a question. How can we take this topic of inquiry and apply it to what we are experiencing right here and now at Live Oak? As we move into a planned period of inquiry, can we all ask ourselves these questions? What do I know? Is it true, or am I making assumptions? Can I absolutely know it's true? What's my proof? How do I feel when I react to these thoughts and assumptions? How do I feel when I believe these assumptions? And finally, who or what would I be without these assumptions and these thoughts? Now, if your interest is piqued, and if you're willing to challenge yourself, I invite you to go to Byron Katie's website at thework.com. She has some downloadable worksheets along with detailed instructions on how to apply this work to yourself, to what you may be experiencing, not only here at Live Oak, but in your personal lives, to whatever you are experiencing right now or anything that you may be finding problematic in your life at this moment. I'll end with a quote from Byron Katie. The work is meditation. It's like diving into yourself. Contemplate the questions. Drop down into the depths of yourself. Listen. And wait for what shows itself to you. The answer will find your question if your mind is open. May it be so.